the most exciting thing about nonfiction storytelling is that you are telling true stories. And so it's your responsibility to your storyteller to sort of be their biggest champion, be their cheerleader well beyond the final credit rolling on the screen.
Welcome to Talk Doc to Me, a podcast and community dedicated to candid conversations around documentary storytelling. My name is Leia, I'm your host, and today's guest is Sam Vladimirsky. Sam is a director and artist who makes stuff about people who make stuff. He is the founder and chief creative officer of Whimsey, a creative studio that celebrates game changers and culture shifters in the world of art and design through original documentaries, brand storytelling, and creative marketing campaigns. His work has appeared on PBS, Vogue, and the British Journal of Photography. Most recently, he served as the creative marketing director at Academy Award-winning Breakwater Studios, where he ran Oscar campaigns and organized a screening at Capitol Hill. We discuss his fine art background, the power of a well-written cold email, and what it truly takes to have a successful marketing and impact campaign. Y'all are gonna love this one. Let's dive right in. Sam, thank you for joining me on Talk Doc to Me.
Thanks, Leia. Happy to be here.
Are you ready to talk doc to me?
I'm ready to talk to you.
God bless. Okay, Sam, tell me about your story. Let's start from the beginning. You're from New Jersey. What were some of the earliest memories of you growing up and being attracted to art? Because on your website, you say you're a polyglot and you're multi-talented. So tell me how your relationship with art started.
Well, first, thank you for outing me as being from New Jersey.
You said it.
I imagine that will make your viewership numbers plummet immediately. Loss of stock. The podcast is over. But yeah, I have immigrant parents. I am first gen. So I think there's always some expectation that, you have to go into painting, piano, tennis, the whole thing. My parents are Eastern European. I promise they don't really talk like that, but it's for the bit.
It's good. It's good.
I used to go to the Saturday school, and that's kind of where I got my first exposure to art. And we'd have theater, music, and visual art. And my theater teacher, I guess she was this huge actress back in the Soviet Union. Picture like Julie Andrews. Imagine if Julie Andrews in her retirement's teaching you theater. So it was this school that I went to every Saturday from I think maybe 7 years old to 11 or 12. And so I got my first exposure with art there. Her husband was my first art teacher, and he was this famous set decorator, production designer in the Soviet Union. We'd be painting bowls of fruit. But that was
classic.
Yes, literally classic, very traditional fine art upbringing. And I did AP art in high school, that kind of thing. And I was usually painting portraits in watercolor and colored pencil. I loved portraits of old people for some reason. I don't know why. I was super interested in the folds in their skin and getting really close, in somebody's face. And
and they sit still, right? So they're good subjects.
Yeah. And they generally don't complain. They they make good company. And I spent a couple of years painting my grandfather, leading up to the year that he passed away. And I never, to be honest, thought about it until now. But my last portrait I painted when I was 19. It was right around the time that he passed. I just kind of felt like I hit a wall. My introduction with art was super traditional, and I felt like there wasn't really anything else that I had to say with painting. And the thing about the thing that a lot of photographers and filmmakers will tell you is that they started off in fine art because access to the materials you need to make photographs, to make films, is limited. If you don't have the means, cameras are expensive. So a lot of people start elsewhere. But I picked up the camera around probably 16 or so. And honestly, I felt so much guilt when I stopped painting and moved into a different medium that did I fail? Did I let my family down? My parents invested all this time and money into driving me to and from art classes. I felt so much guilt. But then in college, I ended up working in museums a lot on the curatorial side of things. And I was shooting docs with artists. So I still sort of stayed in that universe. And for me at the
What was
time,
the first doc that you did, or how did the idea come about? Like, how did you pitch it, or was someone else's idea? And how old were you?
the first doc I ever did, I think, okay, so I was 16 and 17, maybe. Um, yeah, the first doc I ever did, I was maybe 16 or 17, and I was, a somewhat angsty teen, and like I really wanted to be a teacher at the time. And having immigrant parents, it was a lot of like, we did not float on raft, eating nothing but sea salt for 3 years for you to become this teacher. What is this teacher? No, 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 no. And so I made a doc interviewing a bunch of teachers, some that worked at my school, others were teachers that were friends of friends. Um, Sort of about the profession to change my parents' mind.
Mm.
And it was this 90-minute disaster, but it was enough.
Wow.
It was enough to change my parents' minds and, get them to be like, okay, maybe this is worthwhile. Like, we see the value in this. And I was like,
That's
oh,
like
shit.
that's like a slideshow. I feel like I've heard this from a couple of friends of mine that are like, I really want a pet. I'm gonna make a Google Slides, presentation to present to my parents. But you're like, no, no, no. I'm gonna make a 90-minute documentary to convince my parents.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. It was,
amazing.
it was, it was, it was a glorified Prezi, rest in peace, Prezi. But that sort of showed me, like, in a very small way, what a doc could do. I mean, in my case, it changed two people's minds, two very, somewhat stubborn people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to do that. And so for me, I started making docs about artists which is still something that I do, because a lot of people felt that the art world was exclusive or elitist, and in many ways it is, but even worse, they felt it was irrelevant.
Mm.
And I think we all kind of realized when we got to 2020 that how much art we were actually all consuming and how valuable these jobs actually are. Um, and so I fell in love with making docs about people that make stuff. I felt I understood the toil, and I understood how hard it is, and I
Mm-hmm.
understood, what it means to really like give everything you have towards making a thing and trying to get somebody to care. Um, and at the time I was working on the curatorial side of things in a couple different New York museums, and so these artist docs weren't like a side hustle. They weren't just a hobby, but they were
Mm-hmm.
never what I intended my career to be. They were
Mm-hmm.
always sort of like one hand feeding the other. I felt that by working in museums and knowing all of these artists and doing studio visits and making films with them, that I was sort of I could become a more well-rounded curator in that way. And
Mm.
also, it was just fascinating. Like, you walk into someone's studio and it's a complete mess, and it's like you love it. Like, there's paint everywhere. It was just, I think an artist studio is just a magical place to be. And so in many ways, like, I got into the art of documentary through like the fine art world, and I also used to do archaeology, so I have a very weird backwards winding path.
I was going to ask you about that. So please do tell. You co-taught archaeology? How? Why?
Yeah, so I used to work at this school for a couple of years, and they have like an archaeology program for the kids. So basically, they like excavate all these replica artifacts, like arms and armor and ceramics, and like for them, it's just an exercise to learn how to like work together on something.
Mm-hmm.
And I really was inspired to do an actual archaeology excavation. So I went to this little tiny island in Spain, and spent every morning from like 6:30 to 3:30 excavating this Roman fort, and um, living in this small like beach town, and it was magical. Honestly, I feel like I always describe pre-production as my archaeology phase, because when you are approaching a project, you sort of look at all of the different pieces that you have and see what you're working with, and try to figure out what to build out of this, or what this is going to be. Maybe that's my own weird convoluted way of understanding it, or not wanting to let go of my Indiana Jones dreams, but
I love it.
um
I've never heard that
yeah,
before. It's very original.
I love on docs to do a lot of research and find references, and really, have meetings with my crew, my storyteller, like look at all the pieces I'm working with, um, and then make something from it. In a similar way as archaeologists, they'll spend time excavating, and then they'll look at all of the things that they found, and then they'll build a story around all of these pieces.
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm kind of a, you know I like to be really intentional when I go into it, and so looking at all my pieces, uh, it's just a process, I guess, that makes sense for me.
Oh, totally. So you're making artist documentaries. How are they getting distributed right away? Or like what was the initial feedback? Like you had that moment of like, wow, I really like this. Like, did you get some feedback from other people? Like, wow, this is, like what was kind of you made this piece of work now, and what was kind of the feedback within the art community that you were seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback was really positive. I mean, the thing that everybody always said was like, you know, holy shit, this is like a new way of, sharing my work with other people, or like, oh my God, I thought I was rambling, but like that actually all makes sense. Like, you know, it was a lot of like, artists paying whatever they could to sort of share their story with other people. Um, because I'm from Jersey, and like New York obviously sucked all of the attention. So New Jersey artists that might be living like 30 minutes away kind of rarely got the same level of attention, even though oftentimes they were making even more interesting work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think my approach was also to treat it as a documentary, and it happens to be about an artist rather
Mm-hmm.
than an artist doc. I think a lot of content in the art world made by like big galleries and museums can be so um, dry and alienating and super
Yeah.
academic, and it
Yeah.
doesn't and it's very insular. Like, it's videos made for 65-year-old Upper East Side white ladies that already go to these exhibitions. It doesn't do much to bring new people in or to get people to care. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, I was always interested in, well, what makes this person tick, and what makes this person want to create and spend so many hours, with little financial incentive? What does this person actually have to say in the world? Who is this person? And the work comes second. I feel like there's a lot of arts related documentaries that are like, hello, my name is so and so, this is my painting titled such and such,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
started painting in 19. I'm like, nobody
No
cares.
one cares.
Truly, like, I want to understand your motivations for making stuff. What are you actually talking about with your work? Who are you? You know, and the work will come second. And so they found that like they could actually have conversations with me, and they were very human conversations and very organic. Um, and I was just some like 17-year-old with a janky camera and a tripod and
Mm-hmm.
no credibility to my name, but a lot of people welcomed me to their studios, and they also said, hey, your labor has financial value, and they paid whatever they could. I
Mm-hmm.
remember the first documentary that an artist paid me for, and that was this like realization of like, oh, I could get paid to make docs. That's kind of weird.
That's bizarre.
That's bizarre. So after a couple years of doing that, I honestly just cold emailed these producers of a show called State of the Arts, which airs on PBS in New Jersey and New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I was Liz Lemon from 30 Rock has this catchphrase where she says, "I want to go to there," and that was very much me. Like, they're pretty old school,
Mm-hmm.
traditional producers, but
But you took the initiative. You had a body of work, and you're like, I'm gonna find these emails and pitch it to them.
yeah, and for some reason, and this has been truly the recurring pattern in my career, for some reason these people said yes when they really didn't have much of a reason to do that. And they took a chance on me, and let me run wild with my ideas. Um, and it was just the most wonderful playground
Mm-hmm.
to find my voice, find what I'm interested in. I loved working with other people that make stuff because I felt like they got it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, my I sort of expanded what I the kinds of stories that I want to tell. Like ultimately, I always say that like I like to make stuff about people that make stuff. It doesn't just have to be painters, but it could also be photographers, architects, designers, printmakers, fashion designers,
Mm-hmm.
digital designers, people working in the metaverse. Like anyone that makes something with their hands immediately has my attention. You know.
Amazing. Tell me how you landed a job at Breakwater Studios and explain what Breakwater Studios is for people that might not know.
Yeah. So I think in 2020 when I realized that I want to make docs for a living. Um, I sort of spent these 2 months watching probably like 150 or so like documentaries, long, short. I realized I don't know anything about this field that I want to jump into. And at the time, I felt like I had sort of exhausted the artist doc thing, that, I'd done everything I could in this space and that there was nothing else left to do. And I found these documentaries made by a studio in Los Angeles called Breakwater Studios, and they did this film called Kunstglasser, which is about a stained glass craftsman and a painter and their collaboration. And I looked at it and I was like, holy shit, I didn't know a documentary could look like that. It was directed by Ben Proudfoot, who founded Breakwater Studios. And I was and it he just poured so much love and care and craft into a documentary that I'd only ever seen in narrative films. You
Mm-hmm.
know, really beautiful score and cinematography and rich color. And I felt more than anything that Ben's voice as an artist was also present. The biggest thing that I was struggling with making artist docs was that I found that the artist's voice was sort of eclipsing my own,
Mm.
and I didn't know how to make it a collaboration between the two. And
Mm.
Ben sort of figured it out. And Ben's drawn to a lot of stories about craft. He did a series for the Canadian government called Life's Work that I binged right after I watched Kunstglasser.
Uh-huh.
I was like, holy shit, there's so much more you could do in this space. I didn't know documentaries could look like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to him and we sort of had this ongoing conversation for 2 or 3 years. And eventually, the stars aligned and they needed someone to fill the marketing arm, and sort of be this champion and cheerleader for the studio, for the films. And they chose, their biggest geek from across the country. And I flew over. I kind of moved on a 3-week whim and I took a
Wow.
job.
Wow. So for people that, you know, want to reach out, like they maybe have that, crush in their mind or dream job or something, and they're just like, okay, but it seems so unattainable. Like I don't even in a cold email, like how do I cut through the noise? Like how do you make yourself, you know, human and approachable and you get a response? Because this seems to be a track record of yours. Like what and also too, like looking at your website, I just feel like the way that you brand yourself too is very conversational. It's very approachable. It's very easy to kind of connect with you, and that's hard to strike that balance. Like how would you recommend filmmakers do what you're doing, like be able to reach out to someone cold and cut through that noise?
I think the first thing is just remembering that they are just a person and that everybody loves talking about themselves. If you reach out to someone and say, hey, I watched this film and it absolutely blew me away. Do you have like 15 minutes to chat over Zoom? Most likely they'll say, hey, thanks so much for the kind words. Why cap it at 15? You know, I think being genuine, reaching out to people that you actually admire, there's no harm that can come from it. You have to sort of get rid of that part of your brain that says, "Oh, they're too busy or they're too high up there or why would they talk to you?" I think if you go into it with the mindset of I admire this person and they had to start somewhere and I don't want anything from them other than to get some wisdom. Don't go in there necessarily with a job opportunity in mind. Don't copy and paste an email to 50 different filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
Make a more intentional list of people that you naturally whose work you naturally watch, whose work you sort of aspire to, you know, you know, resemble in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And just write a short, genuine email asking for a little bit of time. Um, I found that when I was working at Breakwater, we'd get a bunch of emails from folks, and you could always tell the difference between somebody that genuinely watched our films,
Mm.
and I'd always give them my time, and someone who was clearly copying and pasting the same email to 50 different studios and sometimes forgot to correct the email. I
Oh,
manage their social media. So whenever I got an email like, "Oh, I've been following your work for years," I'm like, "You've been following our work for 7 minutes, Jeremy. I saw you just followed us. Like,
you are fake.
you are a spam bot." No. So yeah, so I would just say, don't be afraid. There's literally nothing that you can lose. Be intentional with who you're reaching out to and with what your ask is. But honestly, this is an industry where you're more likely to find work in that way
Mm-hmm.
than through job applications necessarily.
Yep. I just gave the same piece of advice actually to one of our fellows. She's a graphic design fellow, and she was like, I've been applying to LinkedIn jobs. She wants to do like art design and production design. She's like, I've been applying on LinkedIn for the past like 4 months and I haven't gotten any responses. And I could tell that she was really like frustrated and thinking about graduation. It got her really anxious, and then I was just like, well, Caitlin, like, who do you admire? Like, who would you want to work for? Like, what is your dream job? What is that? And then I recommended the same thing. Like, why don't you write a very genuine note to them and say, hey, like, whatever it is, but reaching out to those people with a genuine tone, I feel like goes so far. And like you said, it's very easy to see and feel if someone is authentic or not. So just really go after the people that their work truly inspires you. It will not yield any good results if you do it to like 100 people.
Exactly. And also, you know, remember that you're going to be on the other end of that one day.
Mm,
And so that's sort of the other component. Like, if people gave you their time when you needed it, I would say just give that time back
yep.
when it's your turn to be on the other end. I think the best jobs I've ever gotten were through cold emails.
Mm,
It's not that they don't review your portfolio, but a lot of the times job application sites are honestly reviewed by AI first, and they scan your application for certain code words. So for some reason you didn't phrase something the right way, or you're applying to a super competitive job at a major corporation, like there's a chance a human didn't even look at your resume.
that is so
A lot of
crazy.
It's true, but a lot of people have portfolio websites and they have their emails, or they have agencies, or you know um I would just say, don't I didn't go to film school, and I felt for many years like that was kind of a downside, that that I wouldn't make it because of that. But I think the silver lining that I found in my 20s is that because I didn't go to film school, I never felt entitled to anything. I never felt entitled to success. I never felt entitled to connections, to the chance that, this little experiment in the film industry would ever work. And it sort of forced me to work twice as hard, because I was like, I have to catch up to all the people that have a 4-year degree just to build a portfolio, just to make connections. And I had to get over this mindset of, well, why would anyone give me the time? And just embrace the, well, why not? I'm not asking for a job. I'm asking to understand somebody's story, their experience. We all started off in very similar places. Um, and I think if you go into this with a similar mindset of, these LinkedIn jobs may not lead to anything, but there is another human out there somewhere that may be willing to give me their time.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I may not get a direct job from that, there is still value in hearing what they have to say, and you never know who they might introduce you to or connect you to down the road.
I like to think of it as like planting seeds, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're planting seeds with people. You don't know if not all of them are going to grow. You try and water the ones that you really care about, but every little connection is like planting a seed, and you never know. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, a week later, something might happen and they might think of you for something, or, you're planting lots of seeds and you don't know eventually like what's going to come of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so and your title at Breakwater was
Marketing
creative
director.
creative marketing director. Okay. Now, walk me through when you first started there. Like, what were the main challenges, or like what was your main goal of advertising, branding documentaries?
So my when I started Breakwater, my title was special project coordinator. And
Mm-hmm.
gradually, we kind of came to find that there was this need for what I called post production. Someone to really be an advocate for the studio and our films. And I was marketing coordinator, and then I became creative marketing director. And I was effectively a department of one. My job was basically to get people to care,
Mm-hmm.
for longer than 30 seconds, which is incredibly, incredibly hard on the social internet. You see the word content everywhere, and that's because content is everywhere. Everybody has expanded into uh, the video space. And how do you cut through the noise and get people to pay attention and to care? The most challenging thing about being creative marketing director was also the most exciting, which was that there was no architecture that I inherited. There were no department protocols. There were no social media templates. There was no strict formula for what an Oscar campaign looks like, for
Mm-hmm.
what impact producing goals are. And as daunting as it was, there was so much work to be done and so much room to play and build something new that I didn't even think about how daunting of a task that was. It was very much trial by fire. I remember I started at Breakwater in March 2022, and this was about 3 weeks before we won the Oscar for Queen of Basketball. And I remember the first week, Ben would ask me things like, "Do you know anyone at Valentino?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know anybody at Valentino. Is this?" It felt a little bit like Devil Wears Prada. And I sort of ended that year running 2 Oscar campaigns, effectively art directing and cutting teasers and doing social media. And it's just wild to see that trajectory. I think you learn so much when you are kind of put in a position to invent and build from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, I had an incredible supervisor. I had the best team of filmmakers and storytellers that I could have asked for as coworkers. And so, you know, I felt incredibly safe to experiment and try to figure out how do you get people to care about short documentaries, which are kind of the bastard child of cinema. Some of the first films ever, like Workers Leaving the Factory, were short form nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a form of storytelling that doesn't really have a lot of love outside of like New York Times op docs or like the
Mm-hmm.
New Yorker. So
Mm-hmm.
already you have a challenge of getting people to care about short form nonfiction.
Yeah.
Um, and you also have to get people to care about the studio. And luckily, I was working for a studio that a lot of people in the doc world seem to know.
Mm-hmm.
People would see Breakwater hats, and they would see billboards around town around the Queen of Basketball, and they sort of knew our um, aesthetic and they knew our work. So I wasn't starting from ground zero.
And you
I
had
very much
amazing content to work with. You had amazing films to
Yeah.
work with.
Yes, I had, a library of something like 200 branded and original films across a decade's worth of time
Mm-hmm.
to, some films I got to recirculate. I would post excerpts from films that were maybe 4 or 5 years old. And, all the folks that worked on the film would DM me or comment on the post and like, "Oh my God, that was incredible. Oh, do you remember when, such and such happened?" Like, really my job was to build hype around Breakwater, around the short documentary, around our films. Um,
Yeah.
and the thing is that the most exciting thing about nonfiction storytelling is that you are telling true stories. And so it's your responsibility to your storyteller to sort of be their biggest champion, be their cheerleader well beyond the final credit rolling on the screen. You are like the bannerman for their life. You're sharing their story with the world in ideally a collaborative way. And so it's your responsibility, especially if it's a film that's connected to a specific social cause, to sort of advocate on behalf of your storyteller beyond the frame. And that
Mm-hmm.
was what was the most exciting part about my job,
Hmm.
that I got to sort of be like, hey, look at this insane life that this person led. Look at their legacy. We are all benefiting from the work they did. Like, let's celebrate that.
Yeah, let's talk about the Mink campaign. You organize a screening on Capitol Hill with Nancy Pelosi, tennis superstar and EP of the film Naomi Osaka, and members of Congress. How? What? How did? Take me to like the first conversation, or just like the conception of that idea.
Honestly, it feels like such a dream. I To answer your question, how, I don't know. I have no idea how we pulled it off. I don't think I realized it was real until I was on the train home from DC. Um, well, we had two films in circulation at the time that I was running Oscar campaigns for. The first one was Mink, and the second one was another op doc called The Best Chef in the World. And The Best Chef in the World had really taken off. It got like 500,000 views, whereas Mink was floating in the early 40,000s. And Mink is about the first woman of color in Congress, Patsy Mink. Her greatest legacy is Title IX. And so millions of women and girls have benefited from legislation that she passed, but very few know her name.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with the low viewership numbers, with the desire to make Patsy Mink a household name, I was in a meeting with some Breakwater folks, as well as members of Naomi Osaka's team. She has a production company called Hanakuma. And I think it was her head of development, Siobhan Lenoir, who first proposed, like, what if we do something in the Capitol? I don't know what. What if we just do something, around Patsy Mink's birthday in December? And I said, okay, well, maybe we could do a big screening and invite all of these athletes and politicians and members of the press there. And we sort of, and Patsy's daughter, Wendy, who's the storyteller in the film. What if we do like Patsy Mink Day? And it was around the same time that Patsy's official portrait was unveiled by Speaker Pelosi and hung in the Capitol. So I was like, okay, this is perfect.
Good
There's
timing.
no way in hell we can pull it off. But I got to work. I emailed virtually every member of Congress whose communications and press secretaries' emails I could find. And I think one got back to me. And it was Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who Patsy knew and mentored, Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. And her team was like, we think this is a great idea. Because to have a screening in the Capitol, you have to have, one, a congressional sponsor. So someone from Congress has to sort of be the
Mm.
liaison,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have the Speaker of the House's permission.
Mm-hmm.
And so effectively, I worked with Jan's team and with Naomi's team to organize this day and get a bunch of press in the room and make sure it aligned with Naomi's schedule. And we were lucky enough to get Speaker Nancy Pelosi there. I mean, I was grilled by her team for like an hour on the phone as they sort of played every possible scenario of what could happen,
And you
that
had your
day.
answers. You had your answers down.
I winged it. I
Mm-hmm.
They were like, what if she arrives at this time? Well, who else is going to be speaking? What if she arrives at that time? Is the event still going to be happening? And can we move some things around? Or what happens if she, it was really down to the wire. We didn't know if she was going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
But I got a text from her team that Speaker was on her way, and so we made do. And I think it'll probably to my dying days be a career highlight for me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi.
I'm so excited to see this. I loved her so much. I just worshiped her. She was so brilliant. Nobody ever said no to Patsy Mink.
And it was honestly just further proof that you can really cold email anyone. You have nothing to fear by reaching out, especially if your intentions are good. Like, how do you say no to celebrating someone whose who left this incredible legacy in American history that most people don't know. It was the easiest yes, I think, for so many people, especially once like Speaker Pelosi was coming, um, to further champion Patsy's legacy. And so that was, I don't know how we pulled it off.
Wow. In that email to all of the different Congress people, what did you include in there? Like how, like, what was do you remember what the subject was? Did you like put the film? Did you put like the movie poster? Like how long or short was it? Kind of what was that approach?
It was a pretty brief email. I just explained that we're having an event in the Capitol to celebrate Patsy Mink, and Naomi Osaka's going to be there. You know, Academy Award-winning director Ben Proudfoot's going to be there. I sent a little like an invite attached to the email. I sent them a link to the film. It was pretty brief,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hard because members of Congress, their schedules can change on the fly. So a lot of folks didn't even know they were going to be able to make it until very close to the date. But it was a case where once they knew this person was coming, the next person said yes, the next person said yes. Um, there were some staffers that went in place of their Congress people, but we had an amazing, amazing turnout. Judy Chu, who's the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, was there. Congressman Ed Case, who holds Patsy's Hawaii congressional seat, was there. It was honestly, I think, a very mission purpose led event. It wasn't just,
Mm-hmm.
hey, watch our film. It was,
Yeah.
hey, there's this person that, you know, when American progressivism has never seen a larger movement, there's this early godmother of the progressive movement that a lot of people don't know. Patsy Mink was a congresswoman that was not afraid of being the only person to stand up for something in a room. She was always ahead of the majority. And this was a chance for a lot of people to sort of get behind that and champion her. I think it was a very easy yes for people.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, it was not about the film. It was never
Mm-hmm.
about the film. It
Mm-hmm.
was about Patsy Mink.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we make documentaries. It's not really about ourselves or our craft. It's in service of something higher.
How can documentary filmmakers think bigger in that sense? And I feel like your background and just like hearing you talk, it's amazing because you pull from so many different, you know, arts, right? Like there's cutting together a teaser, so that means like you're editing video. There's, you know, movie posters that maybe you gave insight about the creative direction for. There's organizing and balancing, you know, just different team members and communication and coordination, thinking on your feet, cold emailing. And like I know that you guys had some merch as well. Like what kind of advice do you have for documentary filmmakers? I feel like a lot of the times like we're so obsessed with the craft of the film that by the time that the film is over, it's almost like you feel burnt out, or you feel like, oh my God, like I've been spending the last 2 years on making this beautiful thing. Like, how can I even imagine coming up with a merch line or coming up with a social media reel? Like I can't even think about it. You know, how can we shift our perspective, and maybe what are some tips for thinking bigger and thinking in different formats?
I think a lot of the things that you described, they're sort of the symptom. They're not the cause. You know, the higher purpose of what I'm trying to achieve is like cement, you know, in the case of Patsy Mink, cement someone's legacy, you know, get someone's name in the history books. It's activate a community. It is rally people around a film. It is, you know, the social media, the merchandise, the events, those are all sort of like a
Secondary.
means of getting there. Yeah, exactly. It's a means of getting there. It was also helpful in my case that I was not involved directly in the making of the film, and that I could solely dedicate myself to being its
Mm-hmm.
champion. It is very hard when you spend so much time making a film, or even if you have a shorter turnaround, you know, to keep going, because, you know, there's always the next project, there's always the next gig. It's very hard to dedicate your time to something, especially when you have to be earning a living, and social media and merchandise and all these events, they don't pay. the outcome is part of that higher purpose, but it's very hard. um, and so I would say write down what your actual goals are. Making merch is not a goal. Organizing a screening is not a goal. Why did you make this film? My background doing artist docs kind of prepared me for this, because I was interested in talking about not the art itself, not art for art's sake, but what is the larger conversation that this art is a vehicle for? What are we really talking about here? Are we talking about immigration? Are we talking about climate change? Are we talking about gender equity? Are we talking about, what is the art a vehicle for? And it's the same thing in this case. Why did you make this documentary? Okay, I wanted to raise attention to this person or to this cause. Okay, who are the organizations working in that space? Who can
Mm-hmm.
you partner yourself with? You are not alone. We are truly stronger together. And so if you find people that share your mission, it becomes much easier to use your film as a gateway to talking about something larger, championing a certain cause or individual. It's not about like the merch. It's not about the social media. That's that
No, you
that was
just
that,
drop like some major knowledge right there, because I feel like it's easy to get caught up in that. It's easy because it's hard to make a living as a documentary filmmaker. Some people might start to think like, okay, like how can I make it big, or writing down goals such as that, like I want to make a merch line, or I want to have a screening and fill a room. Like I can totally imagine myself writing a goal like that, and thinking about, again, going back to, why are you doing this? Why are you making this film? Why do people need to see it? And then if that is the backbone of it, you're not going to lose sight and get, bogged down by things, because you're actually very connected to the ultimate purpose as to why you did it. And that's why you have to be very, particular about which stories you take on, because you do have to be so passionate about it. You do have to want to go work overtime and do unpaid things, and, just work really hard. So you have to choose wisely which films you decide to pour yourself into, for sure.
and remember that it's not the end. Remember that your goal is not.
To finish
Remember
a film.
that. Yes, exactly. Remember that your goal. It's not about the movie. And I know that sounds so self-erasing, and it shouldn't be. You poured a lot of love, money, care, craft. That should all be appreciated and admired. And we need to talk about our craft. I mean, that's why we're here. But I think in nonfiction specifically, you have a responsibility to the person that you put in front of your camera. You carry their legacy forward. The way we thought about the Mint campaign was that we were sort of reviving Patsy Mink's political campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
The Mink logo for the film was based on her own logo, like pamphlets and political like campaign flyers and pins. And the issues we were activating around were issues that she rallied. We were like keeping her campaign alive. And so it was easy in that case to make the connection because she was an actual political figure. And so we were
Mm-hmm.
literally keeping her campaign alive. But similarly, I think every marketing campaign for a documentary film is a version of a political campaign, whether the issue is reproductive health care or the environment. You made a film for a larger purpose. Chase that thing. Your film is 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe 90 minutes. But the issue that you covered in that exists when the final frame, you know, fades.
Mm-hmm.
So chase that thing. Tap into, and also when you make a documentary, you often spend so much time in pre-production and research, and then you're shooting this thing, you're editing this thing. So a topic becomes very familiar to you. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you have to go into it in marketing with the beginner's mindset, in the sense of don't assume people know all the things you know. Don't assume people care about all the things you care about. You have to look at it with fresh eyes and understand how to be a cheerleader. You spend a year working on Mink or half a year working on Mink, but a lot of people don't know her name. So you have to find language, find themes in the film that you can turn into social media cut downs and graphic designs that can get people familiar with this person. You have to
The beginner's mindset. I like that.
you
Because
have to have a beginner's
you have to assume, not, I don't want to say like that people are dummies, but like it's kind of like I feel like in making for example like a feature documentary about one of the major jujitsu legends, right? I didn't know much about jujitsu beforehand, and so I have to. But our audience, a lot of people that are watching The Cut, for example, are very familiar with jujitsu, and I have to like always be like, okay, guys, like pull back, pull back. Like we need to even just define what is jujitsu, you know, and you have to kind of go back to the basics because people don't know. You can't assume that people know who your character is, or, you know, everyone is kind of a slice of famous these days. You might think, oh my gosh, I'm making a documentary about this super famous influencer. Well, there's a whole bunch of people that actually have no idea who this person is. So going back to the basics, thinking about it as a beginner's mindset, I feel like makes a lot of sense. And having a fresh pair of eyes like yourself that didn't work on the film, I think is definitely helpful, and something to consider, and something that I feel like a lot of people need, just like that fresh perspective after finishing a film to really carry it through.
Your job as a documentary filmmaker is to get someone else to care about something. And in many ways, what you're doing is you're being a curator. I know that word is overused, but having come from like an actual curatorial background, what curators do, what filmmakers do, is we determine what is culturally important. What is the cultural conversation we're having? You know, who we tell stories about and who's telling those stories matters. You have the power to shine a light on something that people didn't know about, you know, to bridge the gap between someone's contribution to history and how much you know about them.
Mm-hmm.
You are the steward of history, of legacy. You get to create this archive. You get to determine what's important, what's worth talking about, whose story is worth sharing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a curator, you are determining what art goes on the walls, what art is collected, what art is valued, what art is worthy of storing for the future, what is history, you know. And when you're a documentary filmmaker, you get to shape the national conversation in big ways or small in a very similar way, and that's a huge charge, you know. But it's why nonfiction storytelling is so exciting.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I feel inspired. I'm just like, wow, I need to like go back to the drawing board and just be like, what is my purpose? What is my purpose? Every film, what is my purpose?
I mean, I don't want to give you an existential crisis, but
No. But I think it's really great because I feel like I don't have, I don't know, documentary filmmaking I feel is very lonely at times, and so it's very I spend time a lot, you know, in an independent documentary thinking about, oh my gosh, like how are we going to make money? Like how are we going to make this profitable in a sense? And it's easy to go down that rabbit hole, but the truth is that that's totally not why we decided to make the film in the first place. And it's just good to have this dialogue of like, why are you actually making it, right? Like, what is the conversation that you're trying to have, and to really not lose sight of it during the very long process that is making a film.
Very much so.
I'm not
It's
having
so
an
easy.
existential crisis, but like I really like it. I really like it, and I think it's something that I'm not hearing a lot. So I appreciate your perspective on it, and I think that's what allows you to curate and be passionate about. Your passion comes through with how you're curating things, and because it's a greater thing. It's like you said, it's not about the social media posts, it's not about the merch. It's really like, what are you actually trying to do, and who can you reach?
Yes, and the craft comes in, you know, almost second to that when you go, okay, this is my higher purpose. One, am I the right storyteller to tell the story? Because that's one of the most important things that I feel like is not talked about. Sometimes gigs come our way that I think we should say no to because we're not the best person to tell the story. We're not the best person to look that storyteller in the eye and have them open up about something vulnerable or sensitive. So that's the first thing. But if you are the right person to tell the story, that's when you have to ask, how do I make something beautiful and intentional in order to bring attention to that story? That's why, like, this new wave of filmmaking that sort of brings all of the bells and whistles of narrative storytelling into documentary, in terms of the cameras we use and the microphones we use and the way we edit and the attention to color and original score, all of those things have the power to direct a viewer's attention to something. And hopefully, big streamers realize that true crime and celebrity culture are not the only things worth talking about and
Mm-hmm.
investing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in. I am looking at you, Prince Harry. Um, but hopefully, all of those tools in our toolkit, now that we have the equipment, now that there is an idea that documentaries can look like that in the
Mm-hmm.
post Chef's Table era, why don't we use all of those tools for something good?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why short form documentary is so exciting, and why I was honored to work at Breakwater, because it's the most accessible form of filmmaking. You really, Ben talks about this all the time. You don't need anything more than a phone and a person on the other side to tell a short, true story. It is the most democratic form of filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we get so bogged down in like the logistics of our craft and who do we need to hire and like what is the next gig. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, of course, but when you're sort of but it is easy to get bogged down in the logistics of filmmaking and lose sight of why we're doing this. And it's so easy to be hyper focused on like the trajectory of your career and lose sight of, well, am I making the best films that I possibly can right now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it is sometimes worth taking a pause if you're especially early on in your career and going, hey, one, we get to make films for fun. So
Mm-hmm.
can we all chill?
Yep.
And two, how lucky am I that I even get to do that? It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if I made something that 50 people saw or 50,000. If you're in a position to tell stories for a living, you've already won. You're here. You're on the other side. And something that I've been thinking about a lot has been what the Daniels said in the 2022 New Yorker Festival, which is, this is before they won 7 Oscars for Everything Everywhere. At the 2022 New Yorker Festival, the Daniels talked about how when we speak about the film industry, we often use language of war. You know, you're in the trenches and there's, you know, it's a uphill battle and there's this hierarchy that we have to follow like the military. And if we don't follow this strict hierarchy, you know, the whole production breaks down. We can't, you know. And the truth is that filmmaking shouldn't be like war. They said filmmaking should feel like summer camp. There is a chance
Mm-hmm.
to build a beautiful and healthy community. That doesn't mean it's not going to be hard and you're not going to pull all nighters and you're not going to like cry and sweat and freak the fuck out. But what it means is we're just lucky to be here, and how people talk about you when they leave your set matters more. We
Mm-hmm.
need to, in both narrative and documentary filmmaking, get out of this, you know, do whatever it takes mindset, because oftentimes that hurts storytellers and it hurts the people that are on your crew.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, just take a deep breath. I'm saying this honestly mostly for myself. Take
Uh-huh.
a deep breath and feel lucky that you're even doing this. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in those moments where you're waiting for someone to email you back, or you're not sure when the next gig is going to come,
Yeah.
or you don't feel like your last project was your best, just remember that you get to do this for a living and you will get better.
Sam, thank you so much for talking doc to me. Is there anything else you want to add?
I've had the most like unorthodox path of getting here. And I used to kind of feel like weird about it, or like, you know, feel like I'm not good enough, or I didn't, you know, go to film school, or I didn't do X, Y, or Z. But the truth is that I think the best filmmakers have the weirdest paths to getting there, even if they did go to film school. So I'm just lucky to be here. I'm trying to take the advice that I dish. And I am really happy to be talking doc to you.
That's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening and or watching. If you enjoyed this, if you had some fun listening to this, found something useful, please give us a review. It would mean the world to us as we are trying to grow this podcasting community. Just do it. Also, if you love talking docs, join our weekly Discord Wednesdays at 5 p.m. PST, where we discuss a doc of the week and check in with each other. Talk soon.